Hi everyone, welcome to Lecture 7. The topic is Employee Attitudes and Engagement. Remember that HR Analytics is about a framework that HR and business leaders can use to collect and interpret relevant measures to make better decisions about programs, and even if the decision is not to invest in the program. In this topic, we will cover a number of the analytic issues, including questions of causal interpretations of the research that is done in relation to attitudes and firm outcomes. This topic is a great example of how the four elements of the LAMP model, particularly the first three, are all interrelated. We will not go through them in a neat sequence though. We will jump back and forth between them. We are using employee attitudes as an example to look at these analytics issues. Okay, here is a summary of our previous lecture. Take a look at the terms. As a reminder, we discussed the workplace health promotion programs and employee assistance programs. We started with the logic side and discussed the path to lower absenteeism, lower turnover, and higher employee productivity. We talked about the types of workplace offerings in relation to wellness programs, such as health checks, end-of-trip facilities like showers, bike racks and lockers, discounted gym memberships, fruit baskets, and even massages. We read through a meta-analytic study that discussed the return on investment for organisations that invest in wellness programs. We also discussed research method issues such as the need for a control group and the difficulties obtaining an adequate control for comparisons. We talked about sample sizes, self-selection bias, and biases due to dropouts from the program. We also touched on multi-group analyses. Lastly, I also mentioned the Healthier Workplace WA website as a great resource for organisations. Okay, let's talk about attitudes. Attitudes are complex. Attitudes are not simple constructs, they have components to them. They are made up of cognition, emotion and action tendency, as you can read on the slide. Attitudes are also multidimensional. Let's start with job satisfaction. Job satisfaction refers to the attitudes employees have towards aspects of their job and work experiences. The Society for Human Resource Management conducted a study and found that the top drivers of job satisfaction are job security, benefits, pay, opportunities to use skills and abilities, and safe work environment. If you think about it, these drivers fall into two categories: what we researchers call intrinsic job satisfaction, that is, things that are related to doing the job itself, like opportunities to use skills and abilities, and extrinsic job satisfaction, such as things that are external to the job, like pay and benefits. We will discuss this in a later slide. Please note, this study was conducted in 2009, and no doubt the drivers may have changed a little. If you look at the job satisfaction literature, it is huge. So to look at a meta-analytic study or review article in the area, you really need to focus your search to an industry or occupation of interest. For example, I'm very interested in job satisfaction to do with nursing, and a recent meta-analytic study suggests that it's task requirements, empowerment and control as the biggest predictors of job satisfaction or nurse job satisfaction. And task requirements is actually something that's quite new to the area as a key predictor of satisfaction. But if I look at previously conducted meta-analyses, they indicated that it was stress, nurse-job relationships, autonomy, leadership, and routinization as the largest predictors of job satisfaction. So certainly things change. Organisational commitment refers to the attachment an individual has to their organisation. There are several dimensions, including effective commitment, continuance commitment, and normative commitment. I will discuss the differences in a later slide. Also, we can look at different types of commitment. We can be committed to the organisation itself, committed to our supervisor, our team, customers, the profession, etc., etc. Employee engagement refers to a positive, fulfilling, work-related state of mind that is characterised by vigour, dedication, and absorption. You can see on the slide that those last three terms, vigour, dedication, and absorption, are the main part of this construct, and each are defined separately and measured separately. Vigour refers to high levels of energy and mental resilience and persistence even in the face of difficulties. Dedication is about enthusiasm, inspiration, pride, and challenge at work. Absorption consists of being so fully engrossed in your work that time passes quickly and you have difficulty detaching yourself from your work. Employee engagement is strongly linked with job satisfaction and organisational commitment. Okay, so here are some key dimensions of effective workplaces which differentially link to job satisfaction, organisational commitment, and employee engagement as outcomes. A summary index of all 6 criteria was found to be strongly and positively related to employee engagement, job satisfaction, and organisational commitment. The next slide explains this further. So with this slide you can see that the most important link to employee engagement is job challenge and learning, then climate of respect, work-life balance is next, then economic security, and in 6th place supervisory support. For greater job satisfaction, economic security was seen as the most important according to Cassio and Boudreau. Next it was work-life balance, 3rd was climate for respect, 4th autonomy, 5th supervisory support, and then job challenge and learning. Now for greater attention you can see the important elements really are similar to job satisfaction and employee engagement. Now let's look at a logic model for employee attitudes. This is figure 6.2 in Cassio and Boudreau. Please note in the book the caption is wrong. Figure 6.1 mentioned on page 147 in Cassio and Boudreau should be a reference to figure 6.2 on page 149, so this figure. Figure 6.1, so page 147, actually supports the discussion on page 143 of your textbook, talking about the 100 best companies to work for. Okay, so we've got that sorted. So on this slide you can see a very coarse logic model for employee attitudes. We will look at a more detailed model a little bit later, but for now I just want to point out that in these logic models the directional arrows in the diagram are intended to imply causality. You can read those arrows as meaning effects or has an effect on or causes change in. So looking through you can see that job challenge and learning, autonomy, supervisory support, climate of respect and trust, work-life balance and economic security all predict high employee engagement, high job satisfaction and intention to stay or commitment. This in turn results in employees cooperating with each other, devoting extra effort to innovation and being better able to adapt to change. These factors in turn, according to the model, will lead to higher customer satisfaction, higher profitability and increased shareholder value. At the centre of the analytics puzzle in this lecture is the question of correlation and causality. This figure shows the logic for employee engagement in combination with particular organisational resources such as training, supervisor support and performance feedback. This combination, and note the multiplication, so both are needed, leads to a positive service climate. A positive service climate in turn relates to employee performance. Employee performance is seen to predict customer loyalty as a result. Lastly, customer loyalty results in positive financial outcomes for the firm, as loyal customers recommend others and also generate repeat business. Many of you are familiar with this principle that correlation does not signify causality. The literature on attitudes and firm performance is a good place to get some practice at thinking about what this means. It has implications both for analytics, that is the design of how we demonstrate relationships in HR, and for deciding what to do in HR, that is how far to go in implementing programs that are intended to change attitudes. Correlation tells us that two variables are related. They co-vary. When one is high or low, the other is high or low, or vice versa. It does not tell us why they co-vary. For example, it is possible that they are both caused by some other variable. We also need to think about the real system that these variables, or our measures of them, are tapping into, and I would like to emphasize that point. Measures don't cause anything. They are ways for us to gauge aspects of the world. For example, the height and weight of humans are positively correlated. Shorter people, including babies, weigh less than taller people, including basketball players. In what sense does height cause weight? Well, clearly it doesn't. Height is a way of measuring size, and so is weight. They reflect different aspects of size, and they are both related to that rather abstract concept. Clearly, height does not measure the same thing as weight measures, but we are not surprised that they are correlated. Think of other measures, for example, the temperature of a gas in chemistry. So from school, you'll remember that the temperature and volume and pressure of a gas are related in an equation. If you know some of the variables, you can plug them into the equation and get an answer for an unknown variable. Well, that's what social scientists of business are trying to do when they look at measures of employee attitudes and claim that these are related to firm performance. They want to be able to take a measure of attitudes and predict something about firm performance, or to intervene or alter attitudes to get a predictable effect on firm performance. Perhaps by plugging into an equation such as regression and a regression equation, they can do this. Unfortunately, in HR, we don't have the depth of knowledge of that kind that lies behind the ideal gas law in chemistry. Recent research has uncovered some aspects of the relationship between employee attitudes and firm performance, and I will try to describe and explain these in this lecture. We will see that it is nowhere near as simple as Cascio and Boudreau's logic model will suggest. Here you can see a scatter plot. The x-axis, or horizontal axis, shows employee engagement. The y-axis, or vertical axis, shows customer satisfaction. Each dot represents a company. For example, Target has employee engagement levels around 60 and customer satisfaction levels around 80. We could describe this overall relationship on the scatter plot as moderate and positive, meaning that as employee engagement increases, so too does customer satisfaction. However, we need to be careful here because we are not saying that employee engagement causes customer satisfaction. Further research would need to be conducted to establish whether the relationship is a causal and the directionality of the relationship. That is, does employee engagement cause customer satisfaction, or does customer satisfaction cause employee engagement, or really is there no relationship, no causal relationship at all? Now let's turn our attention to the measures of employee attitudes. The measures are generally well developed, meaning that they have been tested, refined, modified, validated across many samples, studies, occupations, organisations, etc., etc. Job satisfaction can be measured using a global measure of overall job satisfaction, or we can measure facets of job satisfaction to pinpoint certain concerns we might have amongst employees in the organisation. Facets include satisfaction with pay, satisfaction with benefits, satisfaction with your team, etc. I've provided a measure of job satisfaction on LMS by Schneider and Haynes et al. I hope you find it useful. Organisational commitment is multidimensional with three distinct components. Affective commitment refers to an employee's emotional attachment to an organisation. Continuance commitment refers to the extent which an employee believes that leaving would be costly. Normative commitment refers to an employee's feeling that staying with the current organisation is the right thing to do. This last dimension of commitment is not studied so much anymore. Think about affective and continuance commitment. If you were a manager, which would you prefer of your employees? If you said affective commitment, then this is true and certainly the preferred type of commitment. There are two widely developed scales of organisational commitment, one by Maude, Steers and Porter in 1979 to measure overall commitment, and another by Allen and Meyer in 1990 measuring the three dimensions of effective continuance and normative commitment. Both scales have been uploaded to LMS for you to use. Okay, so here is a slide to further explain the differences between the different dimensions of organisational commitment. I hope you find it useful. Okay, now looking at measuring employee engagement. So there is the Q12, which is a consultant tool to measuring employee engagement. Please note the copyright statement. That means that you cannot use the exact wording of this scale if you want to measure employee engagement in your organisation. Look, I like the Q12 as a measure, as an example of an employee engagement measure. You know, it's a consultancy tool, so it's quite helpful to understand what consultants are using to measure employee engagement. But have a look at the items. You know, the items are quite different to what we see in academic research. And what are they actually trying to measure here? And if we get a measure, what does it actually tell us? If we are measuring are we measuring employee engagement or the presence of possible causes of employee engagement? Note that Gallup also put this in the context of great management practice. So they're not necessarily saying there is one cause, and many of the items are about social processes. So that's one tool used to measure employee engagement. Another more academic measure of employee engagement is the commonly used Utrecht Work Engagement Scale made up of 9 items. The responses can vary from 0 equals to never to 6, which equals always. You can see the 3 aspects of employee engagement: vigour, dedication and absorption in the items. As these 3 aspects are highly correlated, we tend to use a combined score of employee engagement. Now moving on to analytics. There are 3 important issues to do with analytics. First, consideration needs to be given to the time frame to assess these relationships. It is important to collect data on employee attitudes and organisational outcomes at multiple time periods and time intervals that yield stable and representative relationships. For example, in research that I've done, I one time ran a study in a hospital, a survey in a hospital, right after an organisational change process had taken place. And I was actually unaware of this all change process. And hence the satisfaction and commitment scores that I got from the survey were not really representative of the general employee attitudes of the hospital. Second, we need to consider causality. Over time, meta-analytic studies have demonstrated that the causal order is employee attitudes predict organisational performance, but there are certainly many studies which imply that the relationship in some cases may be multidirectional, meaning reciprocal. For this reason, we must collect longitudinal data to determine the direction of relationships and whether they are indeed causal. Last, multi-level analysis is again a concern and needs attention. For example, relationships at an individual level may be weak, but aggregated employee attitudes may be related to aggregated data on organisational performance. To understand how these measures and analytic aspects come together, we need to go back to the logic. Let's have a quick discussion about the happy productive worker premise. For decades, researchers have been debating whether happy workers are indeed more productive workers. Have a think about it for a moment. Do you believe that if you are happy at work, you are more productive? Clearly, this is a complex issue. Let's explore this further and return to the logic model with a few more complexities added. This is the more detailed logic model relating to investment in HR programs to improved employee attitudes and firm outcomes. Note that this model crosses level boundaries a couple of times, as many models do. It starts at the firm level with inputs and ends at the firm level with outcomes, but the intermediate stages are at the individual level. That poses challenges both to our understanding of causal relationships and to demonstrating them with evidence. Is there evidence to support this logic model? Yes, there is. We will discuss this evidence in relation to Cisco's value profit chain. However, before this, let's consider other organisations that see value in looking after their employees to, in turn, look after their customers. What do you think about the idea of putting employees first, ahead of customers and ahead of shareholders? Well, Starbucks is one such firm that has been highly successful with this strategy. Let's understand this further. So here is Cisco's value profit chain. There is evidence to support the logic model with this. Cisco's value profit chain adds the very specific customer satisfaction consequences to those employee work behaviours in the previous logic model. So it is showing what the results are for greater employee effort and cooperation, etc. Things such as customer satisfaction, loyalty and market growth. It also adds the bit before the employees. Notice the management practices at the front of the model. Those are listed and they provide the detail of the HR investments in the previous slide with the logic model. That Cisco model is another example of the HC bridge, or the human capital bridge, that was mentioned in our first class. The figure is lying on its side in the Cisco model. If we turn the HC bridge upside down and put the investments at the top and the sustainable strategic success at the bottom, we have the same flow as in the model for work health promotion programs and EAP mechanisms. This is shown on the next slide. Here you can see the Cisco's value profit chain aligned with the human capital bridge framework. But analytics is all about drilling down and understanding mechanisms. Let's drill down in this model a bit and look at their evidence. These 14 items are how Cisco measured its management practices. Do you think these 14 items are appropriately named in terms of the principles? Look at the rewards items. Do they make sense? Seems to be. For me, the quality of life one is misnamed, but that is not important. What is important is that we look at the questions and interpret for ourselves what they mean. Quite often when we see research results being presented to management and used to justify interventions, we don't actually see the original questions. Only the names of the items or variables are given with the dimensions. Using well-developed measures is important to ensuring we are measuring what we think we are measuring, and also reporting on the scales that we have appropriately named and measured. Please note that this study was at the business unit level, 147 operating companies. So again, here we don't know what causes what. It is possible that the high customer loyalty of the particular district causes associated satisfaction, and that causes retention. So as my last discussion point in Table 6.4 on page 163 of Cascio and Boudreau, they contrast two approaches to modelling the costs and benefits of attitudes, the behaviour costing approach and the value profit chain approach. They are focused on different points and on different aspects. See the assumptions, advantages and challenges listed in the table on this slide. But what can you tell me about these two approaches? Okay, so the behaviour costing approach is about the costs of low employee attitudes. For example, in the last paragraph on page 146, it says, employees with lower attitudes may be absent, may be late for work, may quit more often, or may place less emphasis on customer satisfaction than those with more positive attitudes. This is really the negative end of the spectrum, isn't it? At the positive end, we have figure 6.2 on page 49 and figure 6.4 on page 57. Now, what about interventions? Is it really only the model in figure 6.4 that addresses antecedents? But of course, it is about HR analytics, but in this unit, not about specific programs and their merits. Here is the class exercise where I wanted you to consider different ways that we present and use analytics and relate these to either the behaviour costing approach or the value profit chain approach, and in relation to either job satisfaction or employee engagement. Well done everyone. We have covered employee attitudes and their link to organisational performance. Next week we will discuss decisions about work-life programs, and we also have two teams presenting for their team assignments. The topic of these team assignments is Google's Project Oxygen. See you then.